Hello and welcome to the Learn English Lab. I'm Mike, and today we're going deep diving into the fascinating world of motivation. And to help us unpack all this with me today is Sarah, our expert in all things motivation.
It's great to be here, Mike, ready to kind of dig into this really complex and very often misunderstood part of human behavior.
Yeah, it's a question that seems so simple at first glance, right? Like, why do we do what we do? I mean, we eat because we're hungry, right? We sleep because we're tired. But what about the bigger picture? The goals that we chase, the habits that we form, even the stuff that we avoid. Like, what's the driving force behind all that?
Well, that's what's so interesting about motivation is that it touches just about every aspect of our lives, doesn't it? Our personal goals, how we perform at work, our relationships, and even our overall well-being. And, while some of the answers seem pretty obvious, the deeper we go, the more complex it all becomes.
So is there a magic formula? Is there one theory out there that explains it all? Like, is there a motivation gene somewhere that we just haven't discovered yet?
I wish it were that easy. Unfortunately, human motivation is not, a one-size-fits-all concept. There's no single theory that can really capture all of its complexity. But what we do have is a whole bunch of theories, each one offering kind of a different lens through which to view this very multifaceted topic.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those theories. Maybe a good place to start is with something that we can all relate to, right? Like basic needs, things like food, water, shelter, pretty fundamental stuff.
Absolutely, and that's where Maslow's hierarchy of needs comes in. It's one of the best-known theories of motivation. Think of it like a pyramid, okay? And at the very bottom of that pyramid, we've got those essential physiological needs, the things you were just talking about, like food, water, shelter.
Okay, so we build up from there, right?
Exactly. Once those needs are met, then we move up the pyramid to, safety and security. After that, we climb to our need for belonging and love, followed by esteem. And then finally, right at the very peak of that pyramid, we have self-actualization.
So if I'm getting this right, Maslow's theory suggests that we can't really strive for those higher level needs, like finding our purpose or reaching our full potential until those lower level needs are met first.
Yeah, that's the core idea. Think about it in your own life. If you're constantly worrying about where your next meal is coming from, or if you don't feel safe, you're probably not going to be that focused on creative pursuits or personal growth, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like you said, it affects all of our daily decisions, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. And it gets even more interesting when you think about how this whole hierarchy, interacts with different types of motivation, specifically intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. I've heard those terms before, but I always get them mixed up. Can you break those down for us?
Of course. So intrinsic motivation is all about doing something purely because you enjoy it or find it rewarding in and of itself. It's that pure feeling of pleasure or satisfaction that you get from an activity.
So like solving a puzzle for the challenge or, reading a good book just because you love the story.
Exactly. Those activities that make you completely lose track of time, where you're just totally absorbed in the moment, that's intrinsic motivation at play.
So I guess the extrinsic motivation is kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, in a way it is. Extrinsic motivation is driven by those external factors, rewards or punishments. It's when you're motivated to do something because you want to gain something or avoid something negative.
So that would be like hitting the books to get a good grade on a test or working overtime so you can earn a bonus.
Exactly. We often rely on extrinsic motivation to kind of push us towards goals that might not be so enjoyable, but are important for other reasons.
Now, here's something that I've always wondered about. Isn't intrinsic motivation, better, more sustainable and more fulfilling?
Yeah, it's true that intrinsic motivation has been linked to, greater persistence, enjoyment, and creativity. When we're intrinsically motivated, we tend to put in more effort, we burn out less, and we feel more satisfied with what we accomplish. But that doesn't mean that extrinsic motivation is bad or useless.
There's a place for both.
For sure. Extrinsic motivators can be very helpful for getting us started on things that we might not initially be excited about. They can help provide structure and accountability, and they can even help us develop new skills or habits that eventually become intrinsically rewarding.
Okay, so that makes sense. I might not be super excited about going to the gym at first, but if I stick with it, I might start to enjoy feeling stronger, or maybe I'll get that sense of accomplishment from reaching my fitness goals.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes the most effective approach is actually a combination of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
So this brings up something else that I've heard about. The idea that sometimes rewards can backfire and actually decrease motivation. Is there any truth to that?
You're talking about the over-justification effect, and it is a fascinating phenomenon. Basically, it says that when we reward someone for an activity that they already enjoy for its own sake, it can actually diminish their intrinsic motivation.
So it's like if I love to paint and then someone starts paying me for my paintings, it suddenly feels less like a passion and more like a job.
Yeah, that's a great example. The reward, in this case, the money, becomes the primary motivator, and the intrinsic enjoyment kind of takes a backseat.
Oh, that's a bummer. So if rewards aren't always the answer, what else can we do to boost our motivation, especially for those tasks that we just don't naturally enjoy?
That's a great question, and one that we will definitely get into. Well, it's true, not everything in life is going to feel intrinsically rewarding. We all have things we have to do, whether we like them or not.
That is the truth.
Yeah.
But so where do we go from there? How do we find that motivation?
Well, the good news is that we're not stuck with our current levels of motivation, and we don't have to rely solely on those external rewards. There are actually some really practical strategies that we can use to cultivate motivation, even for those not so fun tasks.
All right, well, lay them on me. I am ready to be motivated.
Okay, well, first off, I think it's super important to set realistic and meaningful goals. Because if a goal feels way too overwhelming or it just doesn't align with your values, you're probably not going to be that motivated to go after it, right?
So instead of saying like, I want to be a millionaire by next year, maybe it's more like, I'm going to try to increase my savings by like 10% this month or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And, breaking down those big goals into those smaller, more manageable steps, it can really make the whole process seem less daunting, more achievable. And that can make a huge difference in your motivation.
Yeah, it's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah.
One bite at a time.
Exactly. And with each step that you take, no matter how small it is, you get the sense of accomplishment, right? And that fuels your motivation to keep going.
Okay, I like this. Realistic goals, breaking it down into smaller steps. What else?
Okay, so another important piece of this is cultivating a growth mindset. And that basically means believing that our abilities and skills, they're not fixed. They can actually be developed, through effort and through learning.
So instead of saying like, oh, I'm just not good at math,
Yeah.
It's more like, okay, I can get better at this if I'm willing to put in the time and the effort.
Right, and when you adopt that growth mindset, challenges, they become opportunities for growth instead of threats to your ego. And that can have a huge impact on how motivated you feel.
Because if you think that you can improve, you're more likely to keep trying right, even when things get tough.
Exactly. Okay, so here's another really interesting tactic you can try. Try to find ways to make even those mundane tasks more intrinsically rewarding.
Wait a minute, how do you do that? That sounds like some kind of like Jedi mind trick.
It's not magic, but it does involve a little bit of a perspective shift. Think about how you can connect that task, to your values, or even just look for those tiny bits of enjoyment within the process itself.
Okay, so let's say I absolutely hate doing laundry. How am I supposed to find any kind of intrinsic motivation in that?
Well, maybe you can try reframing it, as a way of taking care of your clothes so they last longer. Or maybe you can put on some of your favorite music or listen to a podcast while you're folding clothes, make it a little bit more enjoyable.
Those are actually really good ideas.
Yeah.
I can see how just kind of changing your perspective can really make a difference.
And then, of course, there's always positive reinforcement.
Ah, yes. Everybody loves a good pat on the back. But is that really that important for adults too? I mean, we're not training puppies here, are we?
It really is important. When we acknowledge our accomplishments and celebrate them, no matter how small it is, it can create this positive feedback loop that really fuels our motivation. It's kind of like giving ourselves, a little reward for doing a good job.
And it doesn't have to be anything big, right? It can be as simple as like saying, hey, I nailed that presentation. Good job, me.
Exactly. Sometimes those little internal celebrations can be even more powerful than any kind of external reward.
Man, I'm feeling motivated already. Realistic goals, growth mindset, finding the hidden rewards and celebrating wins. This is good stuff.
And there's one more thing that I think is really important to consider.
Wait, there's more. I'm like overflowing with motivation knowledge already. What else is there?
Think about the role of autonomy in motivation. Because when we feel like we have control over our choices and our actions, we tend to be a lot more motivated and engaged.
Oh, so like giving people the freedom to make their own decisions, even small ones that can boost motivation?
Yeah, that's the idea. It's all about fostering, that sense of ownership and control. And it doesn't matter if it's, in a work setting or in your personal life when you're pursuing your own goals.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I force myself to go to the gym just because someone else told me to, I'm probably not going to stick with it. But if I choose to go because I want to get healthier and I want to feel better, then I'm much more likely to stay motivated.
Absolutely. Autonomy is a big part of tapping into that intrinsic motivation that we were talking about before.
This has been so insightful.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm seeing motivation in a whole new light.
And we're just scratching the surface. There is so much more to discover about the psychology of motivation. But for now,
I think we've given our listeners a really solid place to start, to begin building their own motivational journeys.
I agree. The more we understand what drives us, the better equipped we are to achieve our goals and, live those fulfilling lives that we all want.
Well, folks, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of motivation. And
we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From Maslow's hierarchy to the differences between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And we even touched on that fascinating over-justification effect. And of course, all those practical strategies for boosting our motivation.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
But I think the big takeaway here is that motivation isn't just some fixed trait, right? It's something that we can actually influence and nurture.
And, just that knowledge alone, that we can influence our own motivation, that can be incredibly empowering. It can help us make better choices and find more fulfillment in all areas of our lives.
We really hope that you've picked up some valuable tools here today that you can use on your own journey towards greater motivation.
And remember, it's not about, finding that one magic formula. It's about getting to know yourself, understanding your goals, and finding what works best for you.
So to wrap things up, we want to leave you with one last little challenge.
Think about a specific goal that you're working towards right now.
What's motivating you?
Is it more intrinsic motivation, extrinsic, or a little bit of both?
And are there any strategies that we've talked about today that you could use, to boost your motivation and increase your chances of reaching that goal?
Take some time to reflect on these questions and start putting that knowledge into action.
And remember, even those small steps, they can lead to huge progress over time.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into motivation.
And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into the world of psychology and personal growth. Until next time. So we've come to the end of our deep dives into the fascinating world of motivation.
It's been a really interesting journey, hasn't it? Exploring, all the different facets of motivation.
Absolutely. And, the big takeaway for me is that motivation, it's not this fixed thing.
It's dynamic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a process that we can actually shape and we can influence.
And just understanding that, can be really empowering for people.
Yeah, and hopefully our listeners have picked up some useful tools along the way that they can use on their own journeys towards greater motivation.
And, it's really all about, figuring out what works best for you as an individual.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here.
Exactly. And I think, as we wrap up here, it would be great for everyone listening to just take a moment to think about, one specific goal that you're working towards right now.
Yeah, what's driving you? Is it more intrinsic or extrinsic motivation?
Or maybe it's a combination of both.
And, think about the strategies that we've talked about today. Are there any that you could use to kind of, boost your motivation and increase your chances of success?
So yeah, just take some time to reflect on all of this, and most importantly, start putting, this knowledge into action.
Because even those small steps, they can make a big difference over time.
Absolutely.
So that's it for this episode of the Learn English Lab.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into motivation.
And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. Until next time.